They thought they could steal my life savings, forge my signature, and throw me out like yesterday's garbage. My own flesh and blood stood by and watched as his wife slapped me across the face and screamed, "Find somewhere else to live, you worthless old hag." But what they didn't know was that this 72-year-old grandmother had one final trick up her sleeve, and it was worth $500,000. Before we begin, let me know in the comments what city you're watching from, and don't forget to rate this story from 0 to 10 at the end. Trust me, you're going to want to hear every word of what happened next. My name is Cordelia Holloway, and for 67 years, I lived what most people would call a quiet, unremarkable life. I worked as a senior bookkeeper for a mid-size insurance firm in Portland, Oregon. I married my college sweetheart, Franklin, raised 3 children, and thought I understood how the world worked. I believed in treating people with respect, keeping your word, and that family always comes first. After Franklin passed away 3 years ago from a sudden heart attack, I found myself alone in our 4-bedroom colonial home. The silence was deafening. Every creaking floorboard, every tick of the grandfather clock seemed amplified. My youngest son, Xavier, and his wife, Pandora, had been visiting more frequently, ostensibly to check on me. They'd bring their twin daughters, Luna and Nova, who were 8, and the light of my life. Xavier worked in tech sales, though his income was sporadic. Pandora called herself a lifestyle consultant, which seemed to involve a lot of yoga classes and very little actual consulting. They lived in a trendy but expensive apartment downtown, always seeming to struggle financially, despite their aspirational Instagram posts. The warning signs were there from the beginning, but grief has a way of making you blind to red flags. It started innocently enough. "Mom, you're rattling around in this big house all alone," Xavier said one evening as we finished dinner. "Why don't you come live with us? We could convert the den into a nice space for you." The idea of selling my beloved home where Franklin and I had built our life felt like cutting away a piece of my soul. But loneliness is a powerful motivator, and the constant worry about maintaining such a large property was wearing me down. After months of gentle persuasion, I agreed. We put the house on the market, and it sold within 2 weeks for $485,000. Xavier and Pandora were elated, already making plans for how the extra space would transform their lives. They promised me a beautiful suite in their new home, a proper bedroom, sitting area, and private bathroom. "You'll have your independence, but we'll all be together," Pandora assured me, her voice honey-sweet. The first red flag should have been when they found a house that cost $650,000, nearly $200 more than what we discussed. "But Mom, it's an investment. The neighborhood is up and coming. Your money will actually grow." Against my better judgment, I agreed to contribute $400,000 from my house sale, keeping only $85,000 for myself. For the first few months, everything seemed perfect. The girls loved having Grandma around, and I enjoyed helping with dinner, bedtime stories, and homework. But slowly, things began to change. Pandora started making little comments about my old-fashioned cooking. She'd rearrange the kitchen after I used it, sighing dramatically about how some people couldn't adapt to modern appliances. The breaking point came on a Tuesday evening in March. I was in the kitchen making my famous chocolate chip cookies for Luna and Nova when Pandora stormed in, her face twisted with irritation. "Cordelia, we need to talk," she said, not bothering with pleasantries. "This living situation isn't working out the way we planned." My heart sunk. "What do you mean, dear?" "You're, cramping our style. Xavier and I are trying to build something here, and having you around all the time is making it difficult." The words hit me like physical blows. "I thought this was supposed to be our family home," I said quietly. "It is," she replied, crossing her arms, "but it's also our home, and we need our space. Maybe it would be better if you found your own place." That's when Xavier walked in, clearly having heard at least part of the conversation. Instead of defending me, he looked down at his shoes. "Mom, maybe Pandora has a point. You could find a nice senior community nearby." A senior community. They wanted to warehouse me with strangers after I'd given them nearly $500,000 for this house? But what they didn't know was that I discovered something that morning that changed everything. I had been looking for my insurance papers in Xavier's home office when I found a folder marked refinance documents. Inside were loan applications, appraisals, and most shocking of all, forged signatures. My signature, copied from the house sale paperwork, had been used to apply for a $150,000 home equity loan against the house I had helped them buy. They had stolen from me. My own son and his wife had committed fraud, forging my name to extract even more money from the home my life savings had purchased. The loan had been approved, and the money was already gone, spent on Pandora's new Tesla, luxury furniture, and what appeared to be a significant gambling debt that Xavier had been hiding. "You know what?" I said, my voice steady despite the rage building up inside me. "You're absolutely right. I should find my own place." They both looked relieved, probably thinking I was going to make this easy for them. But what happened next would show them they had messed with the wrong grandmother. Little did they know, I'd been quietly planning my own financial independence. That $85,000 I'd kept from the house sale, it wasn't sitting in some low-interest savings account like they assumed. I had invested it wisely, and over the past year, it had grown to nearly $125,000. More importantly, I had discovered their fraud, and I had been documenting everything. That's when I decided they had messed with the wrong grandmother. That night, I lay awake in what had become my prison cell, staring at the ceiling and feeling something fundamental shift inside me. For 72 years, I had been the accommodating one, the peacekeeper, the woman who swallowed her pride for family harmony. But holding those forged documents, seeing my own signature stolen and used against me, something broke, and something much stronger took its place. They thought they were dealing with a helpless elderly woman who could be manipulated and discarded. They had no idea they were facing someone who had spent 40 years catching financial discrepancies, understanding complex money systems, and maintaining professional relationships with lawyers, investigators, and financial experts. More importantly, they had no idea that their harmless grandmother had been documenting every lie, every theft, every cruel word spoken in their house of fraud.
The next morning, I made my first call to Ezra Blackstone, a private investigator who had worked several embezzlement cases for my former employer. Ezra was a shrewd man in his 60s with silver hair and eyes that missed nothing. During my bookkeeping years, I hadn't just processed numbers. I had worked closely with lawyers, financial advisors, investigators, and even retired FBI agents who specialized in financial crimes. I had kept their business cards, maintained those relationships, and now I was going to use every single one of them. "Cordelia Holloway," he said when he heard my voice. "It's been, 2 years since you retired? How are you doing, sweetheart?" "I need your help, Ezra," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "I think my family has been stealing from me, and I need to know exactly how deep this goes." Meeting Ezra at a small cafe downtown felt like stepping into a spy movie. He listened intently as I explained the situation, occasionally taking notes in a small leather notebook. When I showed him the forged documents, his expression darkened. "This isn't just theft, Cordelia. This is felony fraud. Multiple felonies, actually. Forgery, identity theft, elder abuse. We're talking serious prison time if we can prove intent and pattern." "Can you prove it?" I asked. He smiled grimly. "Honey, I've been tracking financial crimes for 30 years. If they've been this sloppy with your documents, they've probably been sloppy elsewhere too. Give me 2 weeks." While Ezra worked his magic, I began my own investigation. I started paying closer attention to Xavier and Pandora's daily routines, their spending habits, their conversations. I volunteered to help with household finances, claiming I was bored and wanted to feel useful. Surprisingly, they agreed, probably thinking it would keep me busy and out of their hair. What I discovered was staggering. The $150,000 they'd stolen through the forged equity loan was just the tip of the iceberg. They had opened credit cards in my name, using my excellent credit score to secure high limits. They had applied for personal loans using my financial information. In total, they had racked up nearly $200,000 in debt under my name while I had been living under their roof, trusting them completely. But the most infuriating discovery was what they'd spent the money on. Pandora's gambling addiction was worse than I had imagined. She was losing thousands every month on online poker. Xavier had been day trading with borrowed money, consistently making disastrous decisions that wiped out entire accounts. The Tesla, the furniture, the expensive clothes, it was all financed with my stolen identity. They had turned my pristine financial reputation into their personal ATM, and they thought I was too old and too trusting to ever figure it out. But what they didn't know was that I was recording everything. Oregon is a one-party consent state, which meant I could legally record conversations without their knowledge. The recording that broke my heart came 3 weeks into my investigation. I had left my phone on the kitchen counter while charging it, and they didn't realize it was still recording when they started talking about me. "She's getting suspicious. Yesterday she asked me about the credit card statements." "So what do we do?" Xavier replied. "We stick to the plan. Let her find a senior home, get her moved out, and then we're free and clear. By the time she figures out what we did, we'll have the house equity and there won't be much she can do about it." "What if she tries to cause trouble?" Pandora laughed, and the sound was like ice in my veins. "Xavier, she's 72 years old. Who's going to believe her over us? We'll just say she's getting confused, maybe developing dementia. Everyone will think it's just a sad old woman who can't manage her finances anymore." That conversation was the moment I stopped feeling guilty about what I was planning to do to them. They weren't just stealing my money, they were prepared to destroy my reputation and claim I was mentally incompetent to cover their crimes. Ezra's report arrived exactly 2 weeks later, and it was a masterpiece of investigative work. Not only had he documented every fraudulent transaction, but he'd also uncovered something I hadn't known about. Pandora had a previous conviction for financial fraud from 8 years ago before she'd married Xavier. She was a repeat offender, and this time she dragged my son down with her. But here's what they didn't know. I wasn't just planning to turn them into the authorities. I was planning something far more comprehensive, something that would not only get my money back, but would teach them a lesson they'd never forget. My first move was to secure my finances. I changed all my passwords, set up fraud alerts, and moved my legitimate money into new accounts at a different bank. Then I did something that would prove crucial later. I hired a forensic accountant to create a complete audit trail of every penny they had stolen. My second move was more personal. I started documenting their daily behavior, building a case that would show not just what they'd done, but who they really were. Every lie, every manipulation, every cruel comment was carefully recorded and cataloged. My third move was the most satisfying. Remember how I mentioned I had connections from my decades in the bookkeeping business? One of those connections was Stella Reeves, a senior investigator for the Oregon Department of Justice's Elder Abuse Division. I called Stella on a Thursday morning, and by Friday afternoon, she was sitting in my favorite cafe, reviewing Ezra's report and listening to my story with the focused attention of a professional who had seen this type of thing too many times. "Cordelia," she said when I finished, "this is one of the most clear-cut cases of elder financial abuse I've seen in 5 years. The documentation is perfect, the pattern is obvious, and the amounts involved make this a major felony case. What happens now?" I asked. "Now, we build a case that will put them both in prison and get every penny of your money back. But I need to warn you, this is going to get ugly. Are you prepared for that?" I thought about the recording of them laughing about my supposed dementia, about the months of fake kindness while they systematically robbed me blind, about their plan to discard me once they'd taken everything. "Stella," I said, "I've never been more prepared for anything in my life." Little did Xavier and Pandora know, their biggest mistake wasn't just stealing from me. Their biggest mistake was underestimating exactly what this 72-year-old grandmother was capable of when she finally decided to fight back. The trap was set, the evidence was gathered, and they had no idea what was coming. But what happened next made them realize their biggest mistake wasn't just the money they stole. Their biggest mistake was thinking they could outsmart the woman who had taught them everything they knew about planning ahead. The morning of reckoning arrived on a crisp October day. I had been living with Xavier and Pandora for exactly 13 months, and they had been systematically stealing from me for 11 of those months. They had no idea that today would be the day their entire world collapsed. I woke up early, made my usual pot of coffee, and sat at the kitchen table reading the newspaper like it was any other morning. Xavier came downstairs first, already checking his phone for stock prices and trading opportunities. Funded, of course, by my stolen money. "Morning, Mom," he said absently, pouring himself coffee. "Pandora and I were talking last night. We think we found a really nice assisted living place about 20 minutes away. Want to go look at it this weekend?" I smiled sweetly. "That sounds lovely, dear. Though I should mention, I have some visitors coming by this afternoon. I hope that's not a problem." "Visitors?" Pandora appeared in the kitchen, her hair in rollers and her face smeared with an expensive anti-aging cream that I had unknowingly paid for. "Who?" "Oh, just some people from my old work. They wanted to catch up." What they didn't know was that my visitors were Stella Reeves from the Elder Abuse Division, Detective Marcus Chen from the Portland Police Bureau's Financial Crimes Unit, Agent Patricia Voss from the FBI's White Collar Crime Division, and my attorney, Harrison Pike, a man who specialized in elder law and had a reputation for being absolutely ruthless when it came to protecting senior citizens. I had choreographed this moment for weeks. I knew that Xavier worked from home on Tuesdays and that Pandora had a standing hair appointment at 2 p.m. I had arranged for my team to arrive at 1:30 p.m., giving us just enough time to execute the first phase of my plan. At exactly 1:28 p.m., 4 black cars pulled up in front of the house that my money had bought. I watched from the living room window as my team of professionals, dressed in dark suits and carrying official badges and briefcases, walked up the driveway with the measured pace of people who knew they held all the cards. The doorbell rang. "Mom, are you expecting someone?" Xavier called from his office. "I'll get it," I replied, my voice calm and sweet. I opened the door to see Stella's reassuring smile. "Hello, Cordelia. Are you ready?" "I've been ready for months." Xavier appeared in the hallway just as 4 law enforcement officials walked into his living room. The color drained from his face so quickly I thought he might faint. "Xavier Holloway?" Detective Chen stepped forward, his badge clearly visible. "I'm Detective Chen with the Portland Police Bureau. We need to speak with you and your wife about some financial irregularities involving your mother, Cordelia Holloway." "Financial irregularities?" Xavier's voice cracked. "I don't understand." That's when Stella opened her briefcase and removed a folder that was at least 3 inches thick. "Mr. Holloway, we're investigating a case of elder financial abuse, identity theft, forgery, and fraud. The evidence suggests that you and your wife have systematically stolen approximately $347,000 from Mrs. Holloway over the past 11 months. The number hit him like a physical blow. His legs actually buckled, and he had to grab the doorframe to stay upright. "That's impossible," he stammered. "There must be some mistake." Agent Voss stepped forward. "There's no mistake. We have documentation of forged signatures, unauthorized credit applications, fraudulent loan documents, and financial records showing exactly where the stolen money went. We know about the gambling debts, the day trading losses, and the luxury purchases." That's when we heard Pandora's car in the driveway. She had come home early from her hair appointment, probably because her credit card had been declined, though she didn't know why yet. She walked to the front door with shopping bags in her hands, chattering about her day until she saw the crowd of officials in her living room. The shopping bags hit the floor with a crash. "What's going on?" she asked, but her voice already held the tremor of someone who knew their secrets had been discovered. Detective Chen turned to her. "Pandora Holloway, you're under arrest for elder abuse, identity theft, fraud, and forgery." What happened next was the most satisfying moment of my 72 years on this earth. Her reaction was immediate and spectacular. She didn't deny the charges or try to explain herself. Instead, she turned on Xavier with a fury that revealed the true nature of their marriage. "This is all your fault," she screamed while Detective Chen read her rights. "You said she was too old and stupid to figure it out. You said we could get away with this." Xavier, meanwhile, was staring at me with a look of utter bewilderment. "Mom, when did I figure out that my own son was stealing from me?" "The day I found the forged loan documents in your office. The day I realized that the 2 people I trusted most in the world had been systematically destroying my financial security while I lived under the same roof." Stella stepped forward with another folder. "Mrs. Holloway, would you like to tell them about the civil proceedings?"
I smiled. I filed a civil lawsuit against both of you. I'm suing for the return of all stolen funds, plus damages, plus interest, plus attorney fees. The total comes to approximately $425,000. Pandora's face went white. We don't have that kind of money. I know. That's why I filed a lien against this house, the house purchased with my money. You have 30 days to pay the full amount, or the house will be sold to satisfy the judgment. The beautiful part was watching them realize I hadn't just caught them, I had outmaneuvered them completely. While they'd been stealing from me, I'd been building an airtight legal case. Harrison Pike opened his briefcase. Mrs. Holloway has also petitioned for emergency protective orders. Neither of you can contact her, approach her, or interfere with her financial accounts. Violation results in immediate arrest. Where is she supposed to live? Xavier asked. That's not your concern anymore. I've purchased a condominium downtown with money I wisely invested before moving here. Money you didn't know about because you were too busy stealing from me. There's something else, I said. Everything you've said over the past 3 months has been recorded. Every conversation about hiding assets, every discussion about my supposed dementia, every plan to discard me, it's all documented. I played the recording of their conversation about my confusion and their plan to claim I was mentally incompetent. Pandora collapsed on the couch. We're ruined, she whispered. Yes, I agree. You are. Xavier looked at me one last time. I'm sorry, Mom. I'm sorry, too. I'm sorry I raised a son who would steal from his own mother. I'm sorry I trusted you with my security. And I'm most sorry it took me 11 months to realize the family I thought I had died long before I discovered your crimes.
6 months later, I was sitting on the balcony of my beautiful downtown condominium, watching the sunset over the Willamette River. My phone rang. It was Harrison Pike with an update. Cordelia, I have good news, he said. The house sold yesterday. After paying off their legitimate mortgage and the legal fees, you'll be receiving a check for $287,000. Combined with the funds we've already recovered from their accounts, you're getting back $341,000 of the $347,000 they stole. What about the remaining $6,000? Harrison chuckled. That's coming from Xavier's prison commissary account. He's been working in the kitchen for 12 cents an hour. At that rate, he'll have the balance paid off in about 43 years. Both Xavier and Pandora had been sentenced to 4 years in federal prison, followed by 5 years of supervised probation. Pandora, as a repeat offender, had received the longer sentence. Their credit was destroyed, their assets were seized, and they would be paying restitution for decades. But perhaps the most satisfying consequence was what happened to their reputations. Word of their crimes had spread through their social circles, their professional networks, and their online communities. Pandora's carefully curated social media presence had been destroyed by screenshots and news articles about her arrest. Xavier had been fired from his tech job and would likely never work in finance again. They had tried to steal my golden years, but instead they had destroyed their own futures. The aftermath for them was exactly as grim as I had anticipated and planned for. What they hadn't counted on was my network of professional connections. During my 40 decades as a bookkeeper, I had worked with some of the most competent lawyers, investigators, and financial experts in the state. These weren't just business relationships. They were friendships built on mutual respect and trust. When I called in these favors, every single person was eager to help bring down 2 criminals who had preyed on an elderly woman. The investigation had revealed layers of fraud I hadn't even suspected. They had been running similar schemes on Pandora's elderly aunt in California, though for smaller amounts. The FBI had connected their case to a wider pattern of elder abuse that was becoming increasingly common across the country. My granddaughters, Luna and Nova, were now living with my eldest daughter, Rachel, who was horrified when she learned what their parents had done. The girls visited me every other weekend now, and slowly, we were rebuilding our relationship. They didn't understand all the details yet, but they knew that sometimes grown-ups make very bad choices and have to face the consequences. I was using some of the recovered money to set up education funds for them, funds that would be managed by an independent trustee and could never be touched by anyone else. I wanted to make sure they had opportunities that weren't built on lies and theft. As for me, I've never been happier. I have my financial security back, I have a home that truly belongs to me, and I have the satisfaction of knowing that I stood up for myself when it mattered most.
My new condominium was everything their house had pretended to be: elegant, comfortable, and most importantly, mine. The view from my balcony overlooked the river and the city I had called home for over 70 decades. Every morning, I would sit there with my coffee and newspaper, feeling a deep sense of satisfaction. They had tried to make me disappear, to shuffle me off to some anonymous care facility where I would be forgotten. Instead, I was living my best life while they rotted in prison. But perhaps the most satisfying development came from an unexpected source. 3 months after their sentencing, I received a letter from the Oregon Department of Justice. They wanted to hire me as a consultant for their elder abuse division. My case had become a textbook example of how to properly document and prosecute financial crimes against seniors. Your methodical approach and professional documentation saved us months of investigative work, Stella Reeves had told me when she offered me the position. We'd like you to help other elderly victims build cases as strong as yours. I accepted immediately. At 72, I was embarking on a new career, one dedicated to protecting other seniors from the kind of predators who had tried to destroy me. The training was extensive, but my decades of bookkeeping experience made me a natural fit for the forensic accounting aspects of the job. Within 6 months, I was leading investigations into some of the most complex elder fraud cases in the state. Every case I worked reminded me of my own experience: the vulnerability of trusting family members, the sophisticated methods criminals use to exploit that trust, and the devastating impact on victims who often lost not just their money, but their faith in humanity. But it also reminded me of something else: the power that comes from refusing to be a victim. Age had not made me weak or gullible, as Xavier and Pandora had assumed. It had made me experienced, connected, and absolutely ruthless when fighting for justice. My first case as a consultant involved a 78-year-old man whose nephew had been forging checks from his account for over 2 years. Using the same methodical approach I had developed for my own case, we built an ironclad prosecution that resulted in a 5-year sentence and full restitution. "How did you know to look for this pattern?" the victim had asked me when we met to review the evidence. "Because someone tried the same thing on me," I had replied. "The difference is, I caught them." Working these cases gave me a sense of purpose I hadn't felt since retiring. Every criminal we put behind bars, every dollar we recovered for victims, every family we saved from financial devastation felt like another victory in the war Xavier and Pandora had started when they decided to steal from me. My new colleagues at the Department of Justice treated me with the respect that had been missing from my interactions with my own family. They valued my experience, sought my opinions, and never once suggested that my age made me less capable. It was a reminder of what I had lost with Xavier and Pandora, and what I had gained by fighting back.
1 year after Xavier and Pandora's sentencing, I received an unexpected visitor. It was a young woman in her 30s, professionally dressed, with kind eyes that reminded me of someone I couldn't quite place. "Mrs. Holloway? My name is Zara Kim. I'm a journalist with the Portland Tribune. I've been following your case, and I'd like to write a feature story about elder financial abuse." I invited her in and made tea, curious about what she wanted to know. Over the next 2 hours, she asked detailed questions about my experience, my investigation methods, and my new work with the Department of Justice. "What strikes me most," she said as she packed up her recorder, "is how you turned victimization into empowerment. Most people would have been broken by what happened to you." "Most people don't have 40 years of professional experience catching financial irregularities," I replied. "And most people don't have a network of connections built over decades of treating colleagues with respect and competence." The article that ran 3 weeks later was titled "The Grandmother Who Fought Back: How One Woman's Methodical Approach Became a Template for Elder Justice." It was picked up by national news outlets, and suddenly my phone was ringing with interview requests from across the country. But the most meaningful call came from an unexpected source. It was Xavier, calling collect from prison. I hesitated before accepting the call. We hadn't spoken since the day of his arrest, and I wasn't sure what to expect. His voice, when it came through the prison phone system, sounded smaller somehow, defeated in a way I had never heard before. "Mom?" he began and then stopped. I could hear him breathing, trying to find the words. "I read the article about you, about your new job, about how you're helping other people. I just I wanted you to know that I'm proud of you. The irony of my convicted felon son telling me he was proud of my work putting criminals like him behind bars wasn't lost on either of us. I also wanted to tell you that I understand now what Pandora and I did to you. In here, away from her influence, I can see how wrong we were, how wrong I was. I listened without responding, letting him work through whatever he needed to say. The other inmates, when they hear about elder abuse cases, they don't treat those guys well. Even criminals have mothers, you know? They think what I did is especially low. And they're right. His voice cracked slightly. I've had a lot of time to think about what kind of son steals from his own mother. What kind of man lets his wife assault a 72-year-old woman? I don't have any excuse, Mom. I was weak, I was greedy, and I was stupid. Yes, I said simply. You were all of those things. The honesty seemed to hit him harder than any anger would have. I know I don't deserve forgiveness, and I'm not calling to ask for it. I just wanted you to know that I realize what I lost. Not just the money we stole. I lost my mother, my daughters, my future. I lost everything that mattered, and it was entirely my fault. I thought about hanging up. Part of me wanted to deliver a speech about consequences and justice, but something in his voice stopped me. A genuine brokenness that I recognized as authentic remorse. Xavier, you're right that you don't deserve forgiveness, but you also can't earn it by being sorry. The only thing you can do now is serve your time, pay your restitution, and spend the rest of your life being a better man than you were when you decided to steal from me. I will, he said quietly. I promise I will. After I hung up, I sat on my balcony for a long time thinking about that conversation. I felt no urge to reconcile with him, no maternal instinct to rush to his aid or minimize his crimes. But I also felt a strange sense of closure. He finally understood what he had done, and more importantly, what he had lost. My work with the Department of Justice continued to expand. I was leading a team specializing in family financial fraud cases. We developed the Holloway method, a systematic approach to documenting evidence that became the gold standard for elder abuse prosecutions. In my first year as a consultant, my team successfully prosecuted 23 cases, recovering over $2.8 million for elderly victims. Each case felt like another victory in the war Xavier and Pandora had started. The most rewarding aspect was letters from other elderly people who found courage to fight back after reading my story. One was from a 75-year-old woman whose daughter had been stealing her Social Security checks for 3 years. She successfully prosecuted her daughter, recovering $47,000. Your story gave me the courage to realize that family doesn't excuse criminal behavior, she wrote. My relationship with Luna and Nova continued to strengthen. Now 9, they were beginning to understand what their parents had done. Nana, why did Mommy and Daddy go to jail? Luna asked during a visit. I explained in terms they could understand. They took money that wasn't theirs, and they lied about it. When grown-ups do that, there are serious consequences. The girls were thriving in Rachel's care. I had established college funds for them and was teaching them the values their parents had abandoned: honesty, integrity, and understanding that real success comes from hard work. My work evolved beyond individual cases to policy development. The Holloway Act created stricter penalties for family members who commit financial crimes against elderly relatives. It passed in Oregon and was being considered in 12 other states. At 73, I was invited to speak at the National Conference on Elder Justice. Standing at that podium, looking out at professionals who respected my expertise, I thought about Xavier and Pandora in their prison cells. They tried to reduce me to a helpless old woman whose only value was her bank account. Instead, they created their worst nightmare: an elderly woman with nothing left to lose and all the skills necessary to destroy them. The moral isn't just about revenge, though the revenge was satisfying. It's about refusing to accept victimization, using your professional skills and networks to fight back against those who would exploit you. Age hadn't made me vulnerable as they had assumed. It made me experienced, connected, and absolutely determined to protect not just myself, but others like me. They thought they were dealing with a helpless old woman.
Instead, they discovered that this 72-year-old grandmother was their worst nightmare, someone with the knowledge, connections, and determination to make sure they faced the full consequences of their crimes.
2 years into my work with the Department of Justice, I received a call that would change everything again. It was from Senator Patricia Langford's office in Washington, D.C. "Mrs. Holloway, the senator has been following your work on elder financial abuse," her aide explained. "She's chairing a subcommittee on protecting senior citizens, and she'd like you to testify before Congress about your experience and recommendations for federal legislation." Testifying before Congress. At 74, I was being asked to share my story with the people who could create laws that would protect millions of elderly Americans. The girl who had started as a small-town bookkeeper was about to address the United States Senate. The hearing was scheduled for 3 weeks later. I spent those weeks preparing my testimony, working with Senator Langford's staff to craft a presentation that would be both compelling and factual. My goal wasn't just to tell my story. It was to provide concrete recommendations for federal legislation that could prevent other families from experiencing what mine had gone through. The morning of the hearing, I stood in the marble halls of the Hart Senate office building, wearing my best navy blue suit and carrying a briefcase full of documentation. I thought about Xavier and Pandora, probably starting their morning routine in their respective prison cells, unaware that their crimes were about to influence federal policy. When I was called to testify, I walked to the witness table and looked out at the panel of senators. These were some of the most powerful people in the country, and they were waiting to hear what a 74-year-old grandmother from Portland had to say about justice. Honorable Senators, my name is Cordelia Holloway, and 2 years ago, my own son and daughter-in-law stole $347,000 from me through identity theft, forgery, and fraud. Today, I stand before you not as a victim, but as someone who fought back and won. I spent the next 20 minutes detailing my experience, the methods I had used to build my case, and the broader implications for elder protection nationwide. When I finished, Senator Langford leaned forward. "Ms. Holloway, your testimony is remarkable, but I have to ask, what would you say to people who might argue that you are unusually well-equipped to fight back because of your professional background? What about elderly Americans who don't have your expertise?" "That's exactly why we need federal legislation, Senator. I was able to fight back because I have 40 years of experience with financial systems and a network of professional contacts. But no elderly person should have to be a former bookkeeper with connections to law enforcement to get justice when their own family steals from them." I outlined 5 specific recommendations for federal legislation: mandatory reporting systems for suspected elder financial abuse, standardized training for bank employees to recognize fraud patterns, federal funding for elder abuse prosecution units, streamlined restitution procedures, and enhanced penalties specifically for family members who commit these crimes against elderly relatives. The current system, I explained, relies too heavily on victims having the knowledge and resources to fight back on their own. We need systemic protections that don't require elderly people to become amateur detectives to protect their life savings. Senator James Morrison, a Republican from Texas, asked the question I had been expecting. "Ms. Holloway, some might say that involving federal authorities in family financial matters is government overreach. How would you respond to that?" I had been waiting for this moment. "Senator Morrison, with respect, theft is not a family matter, it's a crime. When my son forged my signature to steal $150,000, that wasn't a family dispute that needed mediation. It was identity theft, fraud, and elder abuse, and it deserved the full force of the law." I paused, letting the weight of my words settle. The idea that crimes should be overlooked because they happen within families is exactly the thinking that allows elder abuse to flourish. Family relationships don't exempt anyone from the consequences of criminal behavior. The hearing lasted 3 hours, with senators from both parties asking detailed questions about my recommendations, my experience with the Oregon Department of Justice, and the effectiveness of the methods we had developed. When it was over, Senator Langford approached me personally. "Ms. Holloway, your testimony today was compelling, and your recommendations are exactly what we need. I'm going to be introducing the Elder Financial Protection Act next session, and I'd like your permission to model it on your suggestions." 6 months later, the Elder Financial Protection Act passed both houses of Congress with bipartisan support. The bill created federal funding for elder abuse prosecution units in all 50 states, established mandatory training programs for financial institution employees, and created enhanced penalties for family members who commit these crimes against elderly relatives. President Harrison signed the bill in the Rose Garden, and I was invited to attend the ceremony. Standing behind the President of the United States as he signed legislation that bore my influence felt surreal. Xavier and Pandora's attempt to destroy me had ultimately led to federal protections for millions of elderly Americans. But perhaps the most satisfying moment came during my flight back to Portland.
I was reading the news coverage of the bill signing when I saw a quote from Senator Langford. This legislation exists because one brave grandmother refused to be a victim and showed us all what fighting back looks like. One brave grandmother. That's how the United States Senate saw me now. Not as a helpless old woman who had been taken advantage of, but as someone who had fought back and won. My phone buzzed with a text from Harrison Pike. Xavier called me collect from prison. He saw the coverage and said he never imagined his crimes would lead you to changing federal law. I deleted the message without responding. Xavier's remorse was irrelevant now. The damage he and Pandora had done had been transformed into protection for countless elderly Americans. Their selfish crimes had created their worst nightmare, a world where elder financial abuse was taken seriously by federal law enforcement. The plane descended towards Portland, and I looked out at the city I had called home for over 70 decades. In 3 years, I had gone from victim to prosecutor to federal policy advocate. I had turned personal tragedy into national legislation. They thought they could make me disappear, shuffle me off to some facility where I would be forgotten. Instead, I had become one of the most recognizable advocates for elder justice in the country. My name was attached to federal legislation that would protect elderly Americans for generations. As the plane touched down, I smiled. Xavier and Pandora had tried to steal my golden years, but instead gave me a legacy that would far outlast anything they could have imagined. In trying to silence one elderly woman, they had amplified the voices of millions.
5 years have passed since that October morning when law enforcement officers walked into Xavier's and Pandora's living room. Today, I sit in my home office, a converted bedroom in my downtown Portland condominium, surrounded by certificates of recognition, framed newspaper articles, and thank you letters from elderly people across the country whose lives have been changed by the work that grew out of my personal nightmare. At 77, I show no signs of slowing down. My consulting work with the Department of Justice has expanded into a full-time position as Director of Elder Financial Protection for the Pacific Northwest region. My team now includes 12 investigators, 4 prosecutors, and 2 victim advocates. We handle over 400 cases annually, and our conviction rate is an impressive 94%. The Holloway method has been adopted by elder abuse units in 47 states and 3 Canadian provinces. Law enforcement agencies from as far away as Australia have sent representatives to study our approach. What started as my personal quest for justice has become an international standard for prosecuting elder financial abuse. But perhaps the most gratifying development has been the ripple effect of empowerment. Every month, I receive letters from elderly people who have read my story or attended my presentations and found the courage to fight back against their own abusers. These aren't just stories of financial recovery. They're stories of dignity reclaimed, self-respect restored, and personal power rediscovered. Last week, I received a particularly moving letter from an 81-year-old woman in Minnesota whose nephew had been stealing her pension checks. After attending one of my virtual presentations, she contacted local authorities, documented the theft, and successfully prosecuted her nephew. She recovered $23,000, and her nephew was sentenced to 18 months in prison. "Your story taught me that I didn't have to protect someone who was hurting me," she wrote. "For the first time in 3 years, I feel safe in my own home." These letters remind me why the pain Xavier and Pandora caused me ultimately served a greater purpose. My relationship with Luna and Nova has continued to flourish. They're now 13 years old, bright teenagers who understand much more about what their parents did and why it was wrong. They visit me every weekend, and I've been able to watch them grow into thoughtful, ethical young people under Rachel's care. Luna recently asked me a question that showed how much she's matured. "Nana, do you think Mommy and Daddy can ever make up for what they did?" I considered my answer carefully. They can serve their time, pay the restitution, and try to become better people, but some actions have permanent consequences. The trust they broke, the family they destroyed, the elderly people they might have helped instead of hurt, those things can't be undone. "But you made something good come out of it," Nova added. "You're helping other grandparents now." "Yes," I agreed. Sometimes when terrible things happen to us, the only way to heal is to make sure they don't happen to others. Xavier was released from prison last month after serving 3.5 years of his 4-year sentence. He's living in a halfway house and working at a grocery store, trying to rebuild his life from nothing. He's required to pay me $200 per month in restitution for the next 15 years, money that I donate directly to elder abuse victim services. Pandora still has 8 months left on her sentence. As a repeat offender who showed no remorse during her trial, she received the maximum penalty under the federal guidelines.
I've heard through Harrison Pike that she spent most of her incarceration writing letters to various courts claiming her conviction was unjust and demanding appeals that have all been denied. I have no contact with either of them, and I intend to keep it that way. They are part of my past, not my future. My work has taken me to conferences and speaking engagements across the country. I've addressed police academies, testified before state legislatures, and spoken at senior centers from coast to coast. Each presentation is an opportunity to teach both elderly Americans and the professionals who serve them that age does not equal vulnerability, and that fighting back is not only possible, but often successful. The message I always end with is simple but powerful. They thought they were dealing with an helpless old woman. Instead, they discovered that this elderly grandmother had the knowledge, connections, and determination to make sure they face the full consequences of their crimes. Your age is not a weakness. It's a collection of decades of experience, relationships, and wisdom. Use it. Last month, I was invited to speak at the graduation ceremony for new FBI financial crimes investigators. Looking out at those young faces, I thought about how far I'd come from the broken, betrayed woman who had discovered forged documents in her son's office 5 years ago. I told them, remember, behind every case file is a human being who trusted the wrong person. Your job isn't just to prosecute crimes, it's to restore dignity to people who thought they had lost it forever. After the ceremony, a young agent approached me. Mrs. Holloway, my grandmother was scammed by her caregiver 2 years ago. She was too embarrassed to report it, and she lost her life savings. I became an FBI agent because I read your story and realized that elderly people deserve the same protection as anyone else. Stories like this remind me that Xavier and Pandora's attempt to destroy one elderly woman has instead created a movement that protects millions. My health remains excellent, my mind remains sharp, and my commitment to justice remains absolute. At 77, I'm not thinking about slowing down. I'm thinking about the next case, the next presentation, the next opportunity to show the world that elderly Americans are experienced warriors who can fight back with devastating effectiveness. My condominium is now worth twice what I paid for it. My savings have grown beyond what Xavier and Pandora stole, thanks to wise investments and consulting fees. I'm financially secure, but more importantly, I'm emotionally secure in the knowledge that I fought back and won. Every morning, I wake up in my own home, surrounded by my own choices, living the life I built from their betrayal's ashes. Every day, I use the skills they thought made me an easy target to protect other elderly people from predators exactly like them. They tried to steal my golden years, but instead gave me the most meaningful work of my life. In their greed and cruelty, they created their own worst nightmare, an elderly woman with nothing left to lose, everything to gain, and all the tools necessary to make them pay for their crimes. The war Xavier and Pandora started when they decided to steal from me is over. I won. But the campaign to protect other elderly Americans from people like them continues every day, and I have no intention of stopping until every senior citizen in America knows they have the power to fight back and win.
So here I am today, sharing my story with you, wherever you are in the world. Whether you're listening from New York or Los Angeles, London or Tokyo, I want you to know that this story isn't just about revenge, though I won't lie and say the revenge wasn't deeply satisfying. This story is about something much more important. It's about refusing to let anyone, regardless of their relationship to you, reduce you to a victim. If you're an elderly person listening to this, I want you to understand something crucial. Your age is not a weakness. It's not something that makes you an easy target or someone who should accept mistreatment quietly. Your age represents decades of experience, relationships, knowledge, and wisdom. Those are weapons, not vulnerabilities, if you know how to use them. I was able to fight back not despite being 72 years old, but because I was 72 years old. I had 4 decades of professional experience with financial systems. I had a network of contacts built over a lifetime of treating people with respect and competence. But here's the most important thing I want you to understand. You don't need to be a former bookkeeper to fight back against financial abuse. You don't need my specific background or my particular network. What you need is the willingness to refuse victimization and the knowledge that help is available if you're brave enough to ask for it. If you suspect that someone is stealing from you, document everything. Keep records, save communications, take photographs of documents. Trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, it probably is. Don't dismiss your concerns because the person involved is a family member or someone you trust. Remember that real family members don't steal from each other. Real love doesn't require you to sacrifice your financial security for someone else's convenience or greed. Criminal behavior is criminal behavior, regardless of who commits it or what their relationship to you might be. Don't be afraid to reach out for help. Contact local law enforcement, elder abuse hotlines, or organizations that specialize in helping elderly victims of financial crimes. The resources exist. You just have to be brave enough to use them. And if you're not elderly but you know someone who is, pay attention. Be aware of the warning signs of elder financial abuse. Look out for sudden changes in spending patterns, new financial advisors or caregivers who seem overly interested in their finances, or elderly people who seem fearful or confused about their own money. Most importantly, don't assume that age makes someone helpless. The elderly people in your life have decades of experience and wisdom. They've survived wars, economic downturns, technological changes, and countless personal challenges. They are not fragile flowers waiting to be protected. They are experienced warriors who may just need someone to remind them of their own strength. To those of you who are younger and might be listening to this story as entertainment or inspiration, I want you to think about the elderly people in your own lives. Are you treating them with the respect they deserve? Are you recognizing their continued value and capabilities? Or are you unconsciously contributing to the ageism that makes elder abuse possible? The assumptions that Xavier and Pandora made about me, that I was too old to understand technology, too trusting to suspect fraud, too weak to fight back, these assumptions are everywhere in our society. Every time someone speaks slowly to an elderly person as if they're automatically hard of hearing, every time someone assumes an older person can't understand modern technology, every time someone treats age as synonymous with incompetence, they're contributing to the mindset that makes elder abuse seem acceptable. My story proves that these assumptions are not just wrong, they're dangerous. When you underestimate elderly people, you create an environment where predators think they can get away with exploiting them. When you treat age as weakness, you ignore the reality that age represents accumulated strength. Xavier and Pandora learned this lesson the hard way. They thought they were targeting a vulnerable old woman who wouldn't have the knowledge or connections to fight back. Instead, they picked a fight with someone who had spent decades building exactly the skills and relationships needed to destroy them. The beautiful irony is that their attempt to exploit my age ended up showcasing everything that makes age powerful. My experience, my professional background, my network of contacts, my understanding of financial systems. All of these things existed because I was 72, not despite it. So let me leave you with this final thought. Respect your elders, but more than that, recognize that your elders are not asking for your pity or your protection. They're asking for your respect, your acknowledgement of their continued capabilities, and your support in maintaining their independence and dignity. And to my fellow seniors who might be listening to this, remember that your age is your superpower, not your weakness. You have survived decades of challenges, accumulated vast stores of knowledge and experience, and built networks of relationships that span generations. Use these advantages. Don't let anyone convince you that getting older means getting weaker. Xavier and Pandora tried to steal my golden years, but instead they gave me the most fulfilling and meaningful period of my entire life. Their greed and cruelty launched me into a career that has protected thousands of elderly Americans and influenced federal legislation that will protect millions more. They thought they were ending my story by pushing me out of their lives. Instead, they gave me the most important chapter I've ever written. Now I want to hear from you in the comments below. Tell me where you're watching from around the world and rate this story from 0 to 10. More importantly, tell me about your own experiences. Have you ever had to stand up to someone who was taking advantage of you? Have you ever had to find the courage to fight back when everyone expected you to just accept mistreatment? Your story matters just as much as mine does. Every person who refuses to be a victim, every elderly person who fights back against abuse, every family member who stands up for what is right instead of what is convenient, All of these stories together create a world where predators like Xavier and Pandora know they'll face consequences for their actions. Remember, age is not a number that defines your limitations. It's a number that represents your accumulated power. Use it wisely, use it confidently, and never let anyone convince you that getting older means getting weaker. They messed with the wrong grandmother, and now the whole world knows it. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember, you're never too old to fight back, and you're never too old to win.